Hello, everyone, and welcome to quite an auspicious day. If you don't know, which it looks like from the chat that's already going on, everybody mostly knows, we did release the X-Wing 2.5 rules. You can find them on our website. There's an article that explains what we did with points. There's a whole bunch of different documentations. The core rules, the ROG, the ship points updates, the upgrade points updates. Man, that's hard to say. What else am I missing? There's the banned and restricted list stuff. So much. So I'm sure everyone here is going to have a whole bunch of questions. We're going to talk about that. Everything's going to be good. I'm going to put a little paint on this RZ-2 A-Wing for the resistance, but I'm not too concerned about that. We've got Michael Plummer. We've got Will Pagani, oh my gosh, and we got BK all in the chat. They're going to be pulling up questions because I expect it's going to go really fast. If you do have questions, shoot them out there. I'm going to do my best to answer them as best I can. We also did an interview, Michael Plummer and myself, on Fly Better, so if you haven't listened to that, you should check it out. They have some really great questions about all of the updates that just happened. They got a little bit of an exclusive track from our update last time, so you can go check that out as well. But yeah, let's get this camera off of me. Let's turn around to the chat and let's get going. So let's go. So somebody asked about the Delta 7B being banned. It is not banned. The way that the new point structure works, the configuration for the Delta 7B didn't work in the way that we needed it to. So we banned the card, the upgrade for the 7B, and we turned the Delta 7B into a specific, unique, I'm going to get out of the camera here, ship card. So if you look in the errata document, you'll see that there are print and play cards for all of the 7Bs. They all exist, so everything is there. And for those asking, the shirt was T-Turtle. So there you go. Points for Epic. So Epic is going to be in a little bit of a limbo spot. We are working on that, but we needed to kind of start with a foundation first. So our primary goal was getting everything out, and then from there, we're going to be moving into Epic, so bear with us. We're going to be working on that. There'll be an update in the future that'll come out, but it is not going to be right at the same time. So, okay. So all I'm going to do today, just to keep it simple, is I'm going to take this little Resistance A-Wing, and I'm going to turn all the blue stripes, so blue squadron, into green squadron. It's going to be very easy. So. Oh my gosh, hold on. Let's see. A lot of the generic pilots have the same cost as each other. As each other what? I guess is the question. If we're talking about same cost as like named pilots in the same ship, they do. And there's typically more of a benefit overall to flying a named pilot, but the reason that is because you can only ever take one of the named pilot, whereas you can take multiples of the, am I off camera? What's wrong? Oh, summer's just making me really nervous right now. So you know the trade-off is that the generics you can take multiples of. You can utilize them in numbers. This green is not very good. Let's try a different color. Whereas a named pilot, you can only take one of. So the basic balancing point there is spammability, to use a word that's not very development specific, but I think gets the point across. I don't like any of these greens. They're all coming out so gross. Maybe we won't do green today. Let's try this one. There's no difference in a lot of generic I1s and I2s. Maybe Michael Plummer will jump in and kind of talk about that. I don't have the list in front of me, so what I can tell you is that everything was evaluated based on initiative, pilot ability, whether it was generic or not. A lot of the stuff that we looked at was based on loadout values and then modification or upgrade slots. So, a great one that's going around is the Academy pilot, which is I1, costs 3, but does have an upgrade option, whereas the Obsidian Squadron pilot does not, but is I2. So there are definitely choices in there, and it has a cost of 2. So it has a higher initiative, but no chance to upgrade, whereas the Academy pilot does. And those costs are all baked into the ship points as well. It's not like the upgrade values that you get in your loadout values, basically the number of upgrades that you'll get, are not factored into the overall ship cost. They definitely are. That's certainly one of the levers that we utilized and turned as part of the balancing, as we discuss in the podcast and stuff. Oh, now there's a Dallas. Everyone's in here. Let's see if I can get some more light on here. Let's see. Adding another layer of points seems like it just opens the door to more complicated balancing. That's a yes and a no question. What do we got here? What's this? Oh my gosh. It's greasy, greasy food. Thank you. So it does add another level. It does add another lever. It does add another thing that we have to watch. However, it also makes it much easier to balance because now there are more ways to affect things. In the olden times, because we're now living in the new era, you only had points. So you could, if you wanted to, raise something by a point, lower something by a point, lower something by more than 1 point, all that stuff. Those types of decisions from a development and design standpoint are pretty limited, right? What happens when something, is fine at this point value, but it doesn't quite work on this ship? And that's where the old system got into, well, now there's a variable points costing for upgrades based on the pilot and all of that stuff. And that's a layer of complication. By doing it the way that we've done it, we now have levers that we can pull that don't require us to only work within the point values of the upgrades. So, for instance, you can simply take the upgrade slot off of a pilot that causes it to be abusable, or a ship. You can adjust loadout values so that pilot either can't take the insane broken combination of upgrades that allow them to do something that you don't want in the game, or you can change that pilot's point values in ways that allow them to not take that upgrade at all. So there are so many different and additional levers to balancing that this new system allows, that allows ships to be much more robust. It doesn't negatively affect one pilot or ship because one of the options within that class happen to have problems that go with everything else. So that's kind of like the long-winded but also kind of short explanation for how that system really works. So on the one hand, yes, there are more levers. There are a few more things to watch, but on the other hand, that additional number of levers, that additional slight complexity actually makes it so that the game is much easier to balance because you're not restricted to a one set option for upgrading things up and down. Let's see. I see a great question, but I clearly missed the question, so maybe. Oh my gosh. Let's see. What do we got going on here? Will we see banned ships return in the future? That is certainly a possibility. There's a lot of different ways to address, ships that may be on the ban list. I assume the question that BK is posing to me is probably about the difference between standard and extended formats. So for those who may need the refresher or haven't quite gotten to that point in their reading, oh no, my green. You can now, in standard format events, only take ships and upgrades and all that good stuff from things that are released in 2.0 itself. So they have to come in a black box, and that does eliminate certain things that are not currently re-released in the 2.0 styling. Obviously, one of our big goals, we talked about it at Mini Stravaganza, was to get a lot of that older stuff reprinted into the 2.0 format. And it is something that the dev team led by Michael Plummer has been working on. And so you'll start to see those things that maybe are not legal in standard now become legal as they get re-released. And the big reason for that is primarily because it was really important to us to make sure that everyone was on a level playing field. As new players come in, the inability to get things that were never reprinted in 2.0 can cause a lot of issues when it comes to competitive fairness and balance. Going and having to like track down a really rare ship so that might be super important to a tournament meta or a national meta or even a world's meta, that's not a great player experience in general. And if you happen to be, a veteran who didn't pick up that ship in 1.0, and suddenly a new upgrade comes out and it totally changes the value of that ship in 2.0, and you feel like you need it in order to be competitive, now you have to go dig and find it. So, let's see. What else do we got going on? In games like Warhammer, I tried this kind of building, which got broken immediately by player base. Well, I mean, I think the big difference is that, the loadout values, we're not saying there are no points. If I'm understanding the question correctly about other games that have tried this system, I don't think it's a one-to-one comparison like we're discussing here, because you're not getting things for free or making a player agreement on what the appropriate value of everything is. Everything has a value. All of the loadouts and the ship points and all of that stuff have been play tested and reviewed. We've gone through multiple iterations of the system with our playtesting groups and internally. So there are values. Now, do those values equate to larger than maybe the old point system if you just apply everything that goes on there? Sure, that is true. You're obviously, you're getting certain values of upgrades based on ships for free. Are those things balanced? Maybe. I mean, our data and everything that we've done gives us a fair amount of confidence that, that balance is sufficient. As we talk about all the time, though, with these games, they're living, breathing, and organic games. There's going to be changes. There's going to be things and exploits that players will find as the game grows, and it's not a one-and-done thing. And X-Wing has never been that way, in fact. Everyone here who's played before, now that you can only see my fingers with painting, I'm not going to bother on the bottom of this ship, because I just realized that then all you see is my beautiful knuckles. X-Wing has constantly had updates and revisions, and it has points adjusted, it has errata and all of that stuff. None of those things are going away. The perfect system absolutely doesn't exist for a game that is constantly living and breathing. So, points changes will occur for those who are asking. The frequency of those changes will be as they are needed. We've talked about this a few times before as well, I believe, on different casts and stuff. But we don't, will it be every 6 months? It's generally not a bad timeline, but it's not. We're not going to hold ourselves to some kind of direct or must-follow timeline for updates. We're going to update things potentially earlier if the absolute need arises. We may skip and go longer if there's no need from the standpoint of like where the game is and where the balance is and stuff like that. So you will see updates, and you'll see updates when those updates are necessary. And if that is, a little quicker than 6 months, it'll happen. I would imagine that there probably will be an update before 6 months. If come out, paint, it's not going to come out. If we get to a place where everything's looking really good and there's no real reason to mess with things because the game's in a good state, we'll wait. And, we'll let things develop, and then we'll address it when we need to. So Everything in there is all based on need. And I think it's also important to point out that there's a lot of new stuff going on right now. And it's going to take time for people to adjust it. And there's going to be a lot of problem solving and probably some pretty innovative thoughts that go on. And that's going to be exciting, just like any time a game shakeup as big as this happens. And there are probably going to be things that come out on top initially as players digest scenarios and the new squads that they can build and all that stuff. And there may be things that climb to the top of the local meta or the national meta or anything like that. And that doesn't necessarily mean those things are innately overpowered or broken. It may just mean that players still have yet to find the appropriate answers to them. And I think one of the biggest pieces of advice that we talked about on the Fly Better cast that we did, that you can go listen to, is it's really important at this point, as you're going through and digesting all the changes and thinking about the stuff, to look at that binder again, to look at pilots that you may not have really seen much use for in the older system editions, and think about, okay, well, do they bring new value to the game? Because I think a lot of the times you're going to find that they do have a new evaluation. Everything gets to be reevaluated. So there are going to be answers that players are going to organically find to questions that may come out and be strong, and that's really what defines a meta in general, right? Something rises to the top, players problem solve and think about how to solve them, and in a good and healthy game state, there are answers that players can discover and utilize to then shift the meta to a new standpoint. And new releases will do that too. I mean, you've seen it throughout the entire history of X-Wing. Something new comes out, it poses new problems that players have not really figured out how to adjust to. They adjust around it. Ideally, the answers to those questions are already available with different playstyles or patterns or tactics, maneuvers, all of that stuff. And the cycle goes on and on and on. And that's part of being a living game and the way in which these systems really want to work. Okay, let's see. Any idea why the RZ-2 got its cannon slot back? So you changed how auto blasters work. As we went through the testing process and everything, we identified that only certain RZ-2 pilots were really abusing the cannons. And again, this goes back to those multiple levers. So if you can only adjust the point costs on a cannon, like auto blasters, then you kind of get stuck in this point where it's like, well, I guess we'll take the cannon slot off of Adas, even though that doesn't quite make thematic sense for that ship, because there's no other way to adjust it that doesn't cause more problems than it solves. Here, again, we're able to have those multiple levers to adjust it so that the pilots that don't break or abuse their cannon slot can utilize it, or a specific cannon in this instance. Whereas the pilots that don't still get the option to use it, and it makes them better and perhaps interesting choices for players to make. So the current 4 scenarios look pretty fun. Are there plans for more scenarios, or is that a system that will stay fairly static? So the overall goal with scenarios is that you will see scenarios rotate in and out. It'll be part of the competitive seasons that happen with organized play and stuff like that. Those 4 will probably always be pretty core. If things do change, it's not like you're going to see 4 brand new, radically different scenarios. You might see 1 or 2 rotate out for something new. You might see variations on those. There are definitely plans to keep the scenario play fresh and engaging and interesting. But those 4 that we have in this first update are definitely kind of the fundamental, this is what scenarios look like, this is how they work, all that stuff. So, they are the foundational pillars of the scenario plays going forward. But there's definitely a lot of very cool and fun room to explore with scenarios, whether that's changing even, the special rules for the crates, in the pick up the crates one, whether that's adding additional, nuances to the satellites and what they do when you control them, or maybe other things like that. Do all of those wind up in a competitive play format? Probably not. But that's one of the really cool things once you have this system in place, once you have the foundation for it, is that it opens up new competitive challenges and interest to keep the seasons fresh and interesting and always challenging players' skill at list building and their tactics and their acumen with the game. It also really opens up, experiences that you can have in a casual realm as well, with maybe more narrative-based scenarios or a little more zanier scenarios that might not be perfect for a challenge of, player skills because they add a little too much randomness to the game, but they're great for a game night or a little store event or anything like that. Let's see. What do we got going on here? I don't know is Summer supposed to be telling me what I'm supposed to ask if I've missed things? I don't know how that system was going to work. So if you need anything, Summer, just shout it out to me if you see something. I do, but it's very hard to follow Teams and the chat. And the chat. I don't have enough eyeballs. If I was IG-11, it'd be perfect. So I appreciate you so much, but I'm going to keep doing my best to paint this little guy green. I'm pretty happy with this green, actually. I'm probably going to move on now to some other colors. And let's see. Yeah, so for those asking, the Delta 7B is no longer a configuration card that you attach to the 7. It is now, it's its own ship card. So it works basically exactly the same as it did before, except now you don't have to do the math on the card and remember that it's there. The reason that we made that change is because of the way that the loadout values and the ships and the new points really worked with that. We didn't want to have to stack a ton of points in loadout value on the ships to account for the 7B upgrade and then have them not used on the 7B upgrade but used for other things. So it was much more simple and efficient to simply make the 7B its own ship card, which to us made a ton of sense. And it is a different ship. It has radically different stats. Why not just create a very specific card? And for those who are wondering or are like, well, I can print those out of the errata thing, but I want real cards. We are working on plans to do card packs in the future. And part of that always comes back around to looking at how to take errata and other things that have adjusted or new cards that are required and put them into products that are desirable to players and useful, whether that's just purely an update card pack or something else. Those conversations are, always happening, and we're always looking at the best way to get, print product and official printed versions in players' hands. But we also, we want to make sure that we're never requiring people to pick up products that may not have significant value to them. It's why we made the decision to have the competitive tokens be available as print and play so players could print those out. And they wouldn't have to go buy an Epic Play kit if they have zero interest in playing Epic, but you only need the tokens. It didn't seem very fair to competitive players or other players who don't want to play Epic and have no interest in it to force them to buy an Epic Play product. So, we're always trying to be as equitable to all players about these things and stuff like that. Let's see. Why did we go away from the tactical dogfight that this game was known for and had its biggest draw to? I don't really agree with the fact that we've moved away from that, I guess is my answer to that question. As we've discussed, and I think as folks will discover as they start to dive in and play the scenarios, dogfighting is still very much core to each of the scenario abilities. What the scenarios really do is they focus an engagement protocol to the dogfight. And what that means is without a centralized timer, outside of an actual round timer, players can spend as much time as they want to within the round timer that they're playing at, setting up their perfect scenario. So there's a lot of like positioning, and positioning is great in this game, but there has to be something that drives players to engage in inopportune moments. That's literally combat. You can't fly your ship around. If you're a fighter pilot, you can't dance around your opponent until you see your perfect opening if there's a battle going on and you have objectives to complete, because your ship will eventually run out of fuel. So what scenarios do is they lay an engagement protocol, and they address a lot of those questions about, in competitive formats especially, what's the difference between stalling and slow play? The scenario answers that by simply saying, well, if you stall, you're going to lose, because your opponent is just going to slowly accumulate points until they eventually claim victory. It doesn't stop you from being smart about your engagement. One of the big things with all the scenarios is that when you destroy an enemy ship, you score its ship points immediately to your score. So if you let your opponent score a few scenario points and they get 4 points, but by doing so and playing that game, you set yourself up to be able to come in and destroy one of their ships that's either 4 or more squad points, you've either caught up or you've immediately jumped ahead of them. So by its very nature, the way that scoring works incentivizes players to want to destroy their opponent's ships because they represent immediate and huge scoring potentials. If you're at 12 points and your opponent is at 16, but you are able to destroy an 8-point ship of theirs because of your careful maneuvering and planning, you win the game. And, yes? Like the ones we just launched today? So new players will be able to get them obviously online. The new core rules are also being printed into the next reprint of the core set for X-Wing, so they were just going to become the de facto rules that you get right out of the box. So as new core set products go onto the shelves, the rules are just going to naturally transition for those new players. And given that there are no points to use in the core set, for the most part, players were already going online and discovering where to go to get the points so that they could play the full games anyway. So we didn't feel like it was too much of a stretch to believe that in the interim, well, we're between kind of the existing printing and then the reprint that will include the brand new core rules for what we're calling, internally and with the community at large as 2.5. That interim will exist, and we're going to make sure that everybody knows as best as we can that when they pick up a new core set as a player, and I'm sure their communities will let them know as well, that they need to go online to grab the complete and official updated rules, just like they would have in the past for any of the points and the upgrades and all of that good stuff, errata. And then in short order, as those reprints roll out for the core set, the brand new rules will be right there for players to use and enjoy right out of the box. Let's see. I don't see any other questions, so I'm just going to continue to work on my little green markings here. And then I'm going to move off the green markings, and I'm probably going to change these red stripes because it's a little too festive for me right now. Let's see. Oh, Han, Solo, Snoke, etc. banned. Could we see cards reworked, or are they dead until new ones come out? Either is a possibility. Obviously, in one of the streams last year, we talked about how Luke Gunner broke some of the fundamental elements of the game that we considered very important to the 2.5 rework we were doing, but he wound up not being banned. Instead, we reworked the rules on his card, and he's released as part of the errata cards that you can print out and use with his new ability to basically take a strain and then flip his turret. So there are options absolutely for either one to happen. There'll either be a new version of Snoke or Han Solo or things like that will come out in the future in a card pack, or errata will happen to the current card and it will change. A lot of those decisions are based on development and game needs and where the best balance points for the game is going to be and future growth and all of that good stuff. So either one could work. Any insights onto how scenarios will be selected in the competitive scene? So the current tournament document that's going to get released and I believe will be utilized at Adepticon is basically if it's a 3-round tournament, like every round has a different scenario. So if it's a 3-round tournament, you'll play 3 of the 4. If it's a 4-round tournament, you'll play all 4. If it's a 5-round or more tournament, you will play all 4 of them, and then you will start playing repeats. It's up to the tournament organizer to determine what the sequence of those scenarios are and how that stuff goes. Now, maybe at your local events or, when it's not an Asmodee run event, that decision might be different. We provide kind of the official rules and guidelines, but how players inevitably end up playing with them in their own communities, it's very much up to them. But the ideal is that you're never going to know exactly what to plan for, so you have to make the best plan you can for all 4 of the scenarios. And then depending on the length of the tournament, you may play most of the scenarios, all of the scenarios, or all of the scenarios plus more. Will there be sideboards at tournaments? Not currently, but the future, there may be events that do allow sideboards and things like that. Obviously, one of the great things about the new point system is that it makes sideboarding much easier than in the old system. And I think that's another future benefit of the change and something that is very exciting that we may get to explore in the future. I want a metallic color to do the canopy, but of course I don't see any. Here we go. Yes, Gina. No, those are inks. That's not helpful. Oh, what else do we got? Do you have any attention? So again, for Arctic Rogue, who's asking, intention for regular scheduled updates to points. Absolutely, living game, there's going to be updates to the points. There's not going to be a dedicated schedule per se. We're going to do things as we need to in terms of, if there's an update that's needed earlier than say 6 months because that's an arbitrary number, we'll do it then. If nothing needs to be updated within 6 months, we'll do it then. We'll wait and we'll do it later. So that's kind of the stuff. Let's see. We talked a lot about different ways for the bumping rules and overlapping and what the penalties would be and things like that. We used disarm tokens, we used strain tokens, we used deplete tokens, we used all kinds of things. And the system that we wound up on, which is in the current rules document, was the one that through testing and everything else, we felt was exactly hitting the vibes of what we wanted. And, oh, that's not open. I'm going to put this shit down. I have to open this thing, so. So yeah, we tried a lot of different things, and the ultimate decision was basically made on watching the results, watching the feedback, and determining what we felt was going to provide us with what we needed for the future of the game as we envisioned it and stuff. I have to make sure I'm back on camera. Let's see. So. Let's see. For anything specific about ships or their values or all that, I'll let Pagani or Plumber jump in and answer those as they can. It's hard for me because I don't have the documents in front of me. And it's a 26-page document at that, so I will admit that I don't have it all memorized. Sorry. I'll get there. eventually, but it's not going to be today. So I'm not probably going to be able to answer any specific questions about specific pilots or ships and those values, but maybe one of our fearless developers that are in there can pull that off. Let's see. Does the splitting of the 7B into a separate ship open the door for more ship variants, or was this to address? It was really to address the specific issue we saw with that ship, which was it didn't work. The way in which FFG had decided to do that as a configuration rather than its own ship card did not work with the way in which we envisioned ship costs and loadout values and all that stuff going forward. It also, just from a fundamental ease of play standpoint, I loved playing Delta 7s, and I really liked the Delta 7B, and it was always a little difficult to have a ship card that was then modified by an upgrade card. And while I got very used to doing that after several playthroughs, having it be its own ship card, I think from a player perspective, just makes everything so much simpler and cleaner. And it also allows us to, once again, address things like variable point costs on the upgrade, because now we don't have to worry about that. It's just built into the ship cost and those kinds of things. So all right, looks like we got a whole lot of stuff. Yes, Miss. What excites me the most? Summer's talking to me through glass. So, honestly, I think the most exciting thing about 2.5 is really the opportunity that it represents to go back through the 5 binders of cards I have and look at all of these pilots and ships and upgrades with fresh eyes. The old version of building points, and your squads to 200, it's a weird one because what it said was, in a lot of ways, especially when you're first approaching the game, you think about that new player who just got their Luke Skywalker and their X-Wing, and they're like, okay, I'm going to put R2-D2 on him, I'm going to put proton torpedoes on him, it's going to be great. And then they realize that, that doesn't really work. There's many times where not using all of the upgrades that you think you would put on a pilot or want to put on a pilot is the way that makes sense. Because the old version of squad building was largely subtractive. It was hit 200 or lower, So what you're going to do is you're going to look at everything that you want to take, and then you're going to delete down until you hit that maximum of whatever you've set. And well, that's a fine way to do it. It's also a very negative way to approach building, because instead of adding things, instead of building, you're actually subtracting. With the new system, you get to simply look at everything with fresh eyes because everything's kind of been rebalanced, Pilots now have more differentiation between them, which allows for more player choice and agency in terms of what you want to take, because what does you want your squad to do? Because now what you're doing is you're looking at, well, okay, this pilot has the better ability or has the higher initiative, but this pilot, which is in the same range band, may have the weaker pilot ability, but it has more loadout, so I can build it in a way that I think is more advantageous for what I expect to face when it comes to the scenarios that I'm going to go with or anything like that. And so now you have a real decision point. You have more interesting choices to make when you're squad building because there's more variance and variables within the thing, which, yes, does mean that squad building and list building is slightly more complex the farther from the skill floor you go. And I think that's a good thing. You want that complexity and that interest in your building. You don't want people to be able to be like, okay, well, these are the best things. I take the best things and I do these things and I'm done, right? That's a very stale environment. That's not what these games want. Living games want to feel like living games. They want variation. They want surprises. They want people to kind of come in and really come up with some crazy off-the-wall ideas or to look at things in new ways. And that is very much one of the things I think is most exciting is now you get to go back, you get to look at all these pilots with fresh eyes, and many of them may have new life and new value that in the old system was effectively impossible to bake in because there just weren't enough points of differentiation between them. And so what you wound up with were a bunch of cards that sadly collected dust in a binder. Somebody's talking about the Moldy Crow. This kind of goes back to the title cards in general. One of the things that we adjusted when it came to title cards, so things like the Millennium Falcon, the Moldy Crow, we wanted to, in the old system, any generic pilot could be flying the Millennium Falcon. Well, with this new system, we were really able to just go through and say, okay, now only pilots that canonically make sense within the Star Wars mythology to have flown those ships get access to the title card. And so it was a really nice way to kind of, we always talk about a little bit the games are meant for players to dive in and tell their own stories and create their own mark and play within the galaxy of Star Wars. But the best games that allow you to kind of sandbox are also the games that are most grounded and true to the mythology of what they're drawing from. Because, that's, I think, largely why most of us are here. We dreamed about flying an X-Wing or a TIE fighter or, Boba Fett starship. So making sure that the game is still true and accurate to that kind of desire and that galaxy and the IP is really important. And little nods to that are, not only from a game and design balance perspective really important, because it allows the titles to be more impactful but also limited so that they can't be necessarily abusable in ways that you don't mean them to be. It also makes everything line up properly in the right way. Yes, ma'am. I have not. Well, not here. Plumber did an amazing job explaining it on the podcast, so I will do my best to steal all of his great words. Effectively, when we were going through playtesting and looking at all the changes, especially with scenario play, what we discovered were 2 ship builds just simply did not have the presence of scenario to be effective. They always struggled, and they were typically reported as a not very great time. So the determination was people just won't play 2 ship builds anymore. It's not viable. No one will do it. Depending on your point of view, if you love running 2 ship builds, then that is a sad time and an unfortunate loss. But from our perspective and everything that was going and playtesting feedback, that overall everything was working really well. The decision was, well, if 2 ship builds are just not going to work within scenarios, we will, make the minimum 3 instead of 2, which stops new players from falling into the trap of I'm going to try to play 2 ships and have a very bad time of it, because you want people to have to work for their success, but you also want to see them have success. And so we determined from that point to simply make the new minimum 3 to 8. So there you go. That's the answer to that one. Question, would you consider, it's gone now. Sorry. There was a question about loadout values and how that stuff works. I think I got the gist of it, so I'll try to answer it. But effectively, the loadout values are very different between pilots because they're taking into account a bunch of different balancing perspectives and also making sure that those pilots have very different choices to be made within their range bands. So a pilot may have a better pilot skill but a lower loadout value, which means they can't take X, Y, or Z upgrade, or they can only take that upgrade and they have to sacrifice everything else to take it. A lot of the determinations we made and the things we looked at with the playtesters and stuff were, well, this pilot really wants to take advanced proton torpedoes, and if they can take advanced proton torpedoes with X, Y, or Z additional upgrades, they become a problem. And so then the answer was, well, you can either take advanced proton torpedoes and nothing else, or you can take these other upgrades, which also make them very good, but play in a very different way than if you take them with advanced proton torpedoes. And that is largely why, largely why those differences in points exist. It is intentional in many cases that a pilot cannot do X, Y, or Z, but another pilot can, because that is how the system begins to balance these pilots and make them interesting choices. And that's part of all of the levers that we now get to pull with this stuff. Somebody said something about Dutch and proton torpedoes. The developers may have a great answer for that. My goofy answer is, well, we never actually see Dutch shoot proton torpedoes, so who knows if they were loaded or not. He gets blown up before he even gets the chance to shoot, so we're just making assumptions now. He totally had them. We know, but so maybe Plummer or Pagani may have a more real answer for you than that, but I do not, unfortunately. You mentioned that only a canon-appropriate pilot can take titles. If the pilot has the title card upgrade, can they choose any of the titles available for their ship? I'm not entirely sure if I understand that question, so maybe Plummer can jump in and answer that. What is your answer to the problem that it's possible that there will be one ultimate build per pilot, which will be used most of the time? I guess my first question would be is if that actually becomes the case, which I think is assuming a lot based on the fact that there are 4 distinct scenarios that all have different questions that are being asked of players in the squads that are in them. How is that largely different than the current situation now where you see so many pilots that have the ideal kit that they want to take, and that's what players take, right? I think naturally from the competitive standpoint, we're not looking for perfect balance. We talk about this all the time. Perfect balance means that everything is identical. Everything is literally the same. There are going to be things that, within the band of the power level are on the high end, and there are going to be things that are on the low end. Our goal is to try to make that band as narrow as possible within reason. And then the point of making it narrow as possible is that a player can utilize their skill, can utilize luck, can utilize a scenario advantage to make something that's on the lower end very good or better than something that's on the higher end based on all these other variable factors. So that, again, every game that I've ever played has things that are just determined to be the best. They're the most efficient. And those builds get taken a lot. A good balanced game that is not perfectly balanced, that has unique choices and interesting options to make, says, okay, well, you can take the most efficient option, but it's not so efficient that nothing else can defeat it. That a player can't overcome it with better skill, with better tactics, with more luck, those kinds of things. And that's really the goal. Kyle, Katrin, Core and Horn are Force users. Any updates, non-Force users to get Force powers? I don't have any updates about that. Who can and cannot use Force stuff is, of course, very core to the Star Wars mythology. So kind of goes back to the discussion we had earlier about how, there's the choices that we get to make as players, and then there's the stewardship that we have over the IP, and making sure that everything feels correct and accurate to everything that's going on. Let's see. To clarify, if a ship has multiple titles available to it, can a pilot with a title upgrade choose any of those titles? I would assume so. Modest proposal, since we clarified the title question. But if I'm wrong, then we've got a Plummer and we've got a Pagani in there, so he can jump right in there and, tell us what's going on. I never promised anything forever and ever and ever, chat. Let's see, we got 10 minutes left. I'm basically done with this little A-Wing repaint. I actually like how it came out. It's pretty cool. That used amethyst metallic for the canopy and some little additions to the silver, so that was pretty neat. Let's see. Yeah. If you have any more questions, get them in, or otherwise I think we might wrap this one up. So, last call. Bam. Broadcloak. I'll miss dogfights. I think if you start playing the scenarios and you really dive into them, you're going to find out that dogfighting is still super core to X-Wing. We didn't take the dogfight out of X-Wing. We just made a little bit more to the dogfight. But blowing each other up and outflying your opponent is how you're going to win the game. How did I get the paint to stick? I simply sprayed this with some matte sealer. So I literally took the out of the box mini and I hit it with a coat of dull coat. You could use any kind of artist matte or satin, and that's it. And then paint will stick to it perfectly fine, no problem. So let's see. What's the release schedule? We don't talk about future releases. There you go. Nailed it. So can't answer that. Did Dallas get donuts? I don't think he did, but he did get Vietnamese food, it looks like, based on the egg roll that is sitting in front of me. Any reasons for the titles all cost 0? Well, because we restricted the titles to the canonical pilots, as we looked at it, we realized that they didn't really need to cost points because the points for the title that would have been factored into the squad building are now factored into the pilot's ship cost itself. So they get to take it for free, basically. Oh my gosh. Again, the difference between generics and named characters is that generics you can take multiples of, and named characters you only take one of. So there is an innate benefit to a generic pilot, which is if the ship just happens to be really good, you can take 5 of that ship. This goes back to some of the concerns that players and the community were talking about when it came to scenario play. If there are scenarios and I just take a bunch of chonky, healthy ships that shoot really well, like X-Wings, then do I just automatically win? Does the scale shift so that you just take bodies? And this is part of that balancing act. Yeah, you can take the bodies, but you're not getting all of the sweet upgrades that will, make them shine even more. So you're now going to take, now you have a choice. You can determine, I want bodies, or I want a pilot skill, better initiative, upgrades, all of that stuff. And maybe you want to mix, right? Maybe you're going to take two generics and you're going to take a named pilot, and they're all the same cost and it balances out to 20. These are the choices that you get to make, but it's also part of the balance. If every generic was simply 2 points, then why wouldn't you just take 10 generics, right? I think when you say, well, a generic is just effectively worse than a named pilot, it's a bit disingenuous because you're not accounting for the fact that just having a ship with hit points, with hull points and shields and guns is a huge impact, right? So that is the balancing point. You can only take one of a named pilot, but you can slam the board with a bunch of generics potentially. So the trade-off is, do you want the flash or do you want a bunch of the bodies of the same ship? And that's really what it comes down to. Let's see. You can take multiple named, that's true. And maybe that's better for you. You're going to be dealing with different initiatives, so you can't spam initiative levels and all of that stuff. But yeah, you can definitely build out with named pilots. And I imagine that most people will probably go that route, which is fine. But the option to take generics and spam them is certainly not an issue either. Let's see. How many ships do I consider a swarm? Well, 7 to 8, I would probably say, to me, feels very swarmy. What about tournament formats and brackets? There'll be more information on that stuff coming out when the tournament documents drop in the next few weeks. So, okay. it looks like we got 5 minutes left, and I'm not seeing any like super huge amount of difference or questions. So with that, we'll flip off this camera of this fancy A-wing, which Summer really didn't need to stick on. She probably could have just flipped over like normally, but it's totally fine. So anyway, thank you very much for joining me on this wild, wacky adventure of the stream today. I know I didn't get to everybody's question, but hopefully we got to most of them. It is a very new and different world out there. Everybody here at AMG understands that. There's a lot of emotions. Things are different. Change is here, and a new horizon is forward. If you love it, fantastic. We're so excited that you love it. If you're trepidatious about it, that's totally understandable. Like, take some time, digest all the information. It's going to take a few weeks. There's a lot of stuff. Like I said, 26 pages of ships. Holy cow, that's a lot of ships. And then, of course, all the other changes on top of it, scenario play. So just get out there, play some games, give it a chance, and hopefully you'll find that you love it too. And if you just really don't like it right now, same advice to the people who are in the middle. Like, digest it, check it out, try it. I think you're really going to be surprised and find that it is, if not a different experience, a still enjoyable experience. And there's still going to be a lot of cool dogfighting moments, and you're going to get to blow up Luke Skywalker with Darth Vader. So that's also super awesome. You can be sure to join us tomorrow, 1 p.m. Pacific. Dallas Kemp is going to be here. He's going to paint up some Marvel stuff. I have no idea what it is because our schedule is like all over the place right now. So with that, thank you so much for joining me. Be sure to be good to each other. Check out all the information on our social media, on the website. You can get all of these documents that we talked about today. And of course, you can check out the Fly Better podcast if you want to hear us ramble more about all of these changes with the fantastic guys over there. Till next time, folks, take care. Talk to you later. Goodbye.